For decades, this case sat in filing cabinets and evidence rooms, carefully labeled, reviewed, and set aside. It was examined by patrol officers, detectives, supervisors, and later by cold case units tasked with asking the same questions again, hoping time might reveal what urgency once could not. This case was reviewed, closed, reopened, and archived. Investigators believed they had followed every lead available to them at the time. They interviewed witnesses, they documented movements, they collected what evidence they could, and eventually they reached a conclusion they felt they could stand behind. For years, nothing changed. New officers came in, veteran investigators retired, technology advanced, but the outcome of this case remained exactly the same. For decades, investigators believed there was nothing left to find, and yet the case never truly rested. It remained a quiet reference point in training discussions, a name mentioned when talking about unresolved files, a reminder that even the most careful work can leave questions behind. Because there was always one issue no report could fully settle, one detail that fit on paper but felt unsettled in practice, one part of the timeline that never aligned cleanly with the rest. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't obvious, and it didn't draw attention at the time. But years later, that single detail would force investigators to look again, not because of speculation, not because of rumor, but because the facts themselves, when viewed with fresh eyes, asked a different question. Tonight, we are not here to rush to conclusions. We are not here to sensationalize what remains unresolved. We are here to carefully reconstruct what is known. You will see the last confirmed timeline, step by step. You will hear what investigators believed and why those conclusions made sense at the time. You will examine the parts of the case that never quite fit, even after decades of review. And you will understand why this file continues to trouble professionals who know it well. This is a case shaped by time, by assumptions made early, and by a detail that waited quietly to be noticed. On screen now is the information as it has appeared in official records for years. Victim, Alex Duke. Year of disappearance, 1990. Location, Los Angeles, USA. Status, unsolved for decades. What follows is not speculation. It is a careful return to the facts and to the question that never fully went away. Alex Duke was 46 years old at the time he disappeared. He lived in California, a city he had known for most of his adult life. Friends and family described him as consistent, careful, and grounded. He was not someone who drifted from place to place, nor someone known for sudden changes in behavior. On paper, his life appeared stable. He maintained regular contact with relatives, he followed familiar routines, he kept appointments, and he was known to show up when expected. The date that changed everything was June 18, 1990. That morning, Alex Duke began his day as he normally did. By the end of that day, he was gone. Official records show no confirmed sightings after that evening, no verified communication, no clear indication of where he went or why. At the time, Los Angeles was a busy city, filled with movement and noise, yet Alex Duke disappeared without drawing attention in public spaces where people passed by every day. Investigators documented the basics quickly. His residence showed no immediate disruption. Personal belongings were left behind. There was no clear message explaining an absence, no confirmed travel plans, no verified reason for him to step away from his responsibilities. In the days that followed, police spoke with family members, co-workers, and acquaintances. They reconstructed a short timeline based on receipts, conversations, and known habits. They checked locations he was known to visit regularly. They logged each confirmed action. What they found raised questions, but not answers. There was no single moment that explained the disappearance, no clear turning point, no event that neatly closed the story. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case remained officially open but increasingly inactive. From the outside, the file appeared complete. From the inside, it felt unfinished. The reason this case remains unresolved is not because it lacked attention. It is because the available facts never formed a conclusion that could fully explain why Adams Lawrence vanished from his established life and was never seen again. This is the case investigators believed they understood, and the case that decades later still refuses to settle into certainty. To understand why this disappearance continues to trouble investigators, it is important to understand who Alex Duke was in his daily life. He was not defined by extremes. He was known for consistency. Adams lived alone, but he was not isolated. He maintained regular contact with family members, often speaking with them several times a week. Birthdays were remembered. Holiday plans were discussed well in advance. When he said he would call, he did. Those closest to him described him as thoughtful and measured. He planned his days carefully. He preferred structure, and he rarely deviated from it without explanation. His work schedule reflected that same sense of order. Alex held a steady job that required punctuality and follow-through. Coworkers recalled that he arrived on time, completed tasks without complaint, and kept to himself during work hours. He was not known for sudden absences. He didn't leave early without notice, and he didn't miss work without calling ahead. Outside of work, his habits were modest and familiar. He favored the same grocery store. He used the same routes through the city. He handled errands methodically, often on the same days each week. Receipts were kept. Appointments were written down. There were no recent changes noted by family or colleagues, no new financial stress that stood out, no conflicts reported, no discussions about relocating or stepping away from responsibilities. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Alex made ordinary plans. A conversation with a relative included a brief mention of an upcoming obligation later that week. A coworker recalled a casual comment about returning a library book. Small details, unremarkable at the time, but remembered later because they suggested continuity. The morning of June 18, 1990, followed that same pattern. Alex began his day at home. There were no reports of unusual phone calls that morning, no messages left behind, no items packed for travel. He left his residence at a time consistent with his routine. Neighbors later told investigators that nothing about his departure drew attention. He appeared calm, he was dressed appropriately for the day, there was no visible urgency. As the day continued, Alex moved through Los Angeles in ways that aligned with his habits. Records later confirmed routine transactions, stops that made sense, actions that fit the person his family believed they knew. There was no confirmed meeting that afternoon that caused concern, no argument reported, no indication of distress observed by those who encountered him briefly. Then, as evening approached, the trail narrowed. The final confirmed activity placed Alex Duke at a familiar location at a time that matched his usual schedule. Witnesses described nothing unusual about his demeanor. He did not appear hurried. He did not appear distracted. He did not appear as though he was preparing to leave his life behind. After that moment, there are no verified records, no confirmed phone calls, no reliable sightings, no documented movements that could be placed with certainty. That is where the day ends, not with an event, but with absence. Nothing about that day suggested it would be remembered differently. What happened next is defined not by action, but by absence. Based on everything known about Alex Duke, the hours following his last confirmed activity should have followed a familiar sequence. He was expected to return home before evening. If delayed, he typically made a brief call. If plans changed, he left a message. That pattern had been consistent for years. On this day, No such call came. Expected. By early evening, Alex should have been home. Lights on, dinner prepared or picked up nearby, a routine phone check-in with a family member. Actual. His residence remained quiet. No calls were placed. No messages were recorded. The first concern did not arrive immediately. At first, the silence was explained as delay. Traffic in Los Angeles was common. Errands sometimes took longer than expected. There was no immediate reason to assume something was wrong, but as the evening progressed, the gap widened. 7:30 p.m. Expected contact did not occur. A family member attempted to reach him by phone. The call went unanswered. This was unusual, but not yet alarming. 8:15 p.m. A second attempt. Again, no response. By this point, concern began to form. Not panic, concern grounded in familiarity with Alex's habits. 9 p.m. A third call. Still no answer, no returned message, no indication that the phone had been turned off intentionally. What made this moment significant was not just the silence, it was the break in routine. Alex was known to acknowledge missed calls. Even brief messages were returned promptly. Hours without response were rare. As the night continued, family members reviewed recent interactions. Nothing suggested he planned to be unavailable. No mention of late meetings, no indication he would be away overnight. Expected, a return call explaining a delay. Actual, complete absence of communication. By the following morning, concern had shifted to alarm. Alex did not report to work. No call was made to explain an absence. This, according to colleagues, was entirely out of character. Attempts to reach him continued. Each one ended the same way. No answer, no message, no confirmation of his location. Family members then moved from calling to checking. They contacted his workplace. They reached out to known acquaintances. No one had seen him since the previous afternoon. At this stage, the situation could no longer be explained by delay. The timeline now showed something clearly missing. Expected, overnight presence at home, morning contact, arrival at work. Actual, no home activity, no communication, no workplace appearance. Late that morning, a family member went to Alex's residence. The door was secured. Nothing appeared disturbed. Personal belongings remained inside. There was no note, no packed bags, no indication of departure. This discovery marked a turning point. Up until that moment, concern had been based on silence. Now it was supported by physical absence. Shortly after, authorities were notified. A formal report was made, marking the first official recognition that Alex Duke was missing. This was the moment the case began, not with a dramatic event, but with a timeline that simply stopped. Once the missing person report was filed, the case moved from private concern to official record. The report was made by a close family member less than 24 hours after Alex Duke failed to return home and failed to report to work. Officers documented the timeline as it was known at that moment, noting the last confirmed sighting and the absence of communication that followed. Police arrived at Alex's residence later that same day. Their first task was assessment. The home showed no visible disruption, doors were locked, windows were intact. There were no signs suggesting forced entry. Inside, everything appeared consistent with normal use. Personal belongings were present. Clothing remained in closets. Important documents were undisturbed. His vehicle was not at the residence, which aligned with the understanding that he had driven earlier that day. At this early stage, investigators considered several initial possibilities. Adults, they noted, sometimes leave voluntarily. Delays in communication, while unusual, do occur. There was no immediate evidence indicating a crime. This framing shaped the earliest assumptions. The case was classified as a missing adult investigation, not a criminal inquiry. Officers spoke with family members to document habits, routines, and recent interactions. These interviews focused on establishing baseline behavior, what was normal for Alex and what would be considered a deviation. Statements were consistent. Alex was described as reliable. He kept regular hours. He communicated changes in plans. Extended silence was not typical. Investigators then expanded outward. They contacted Alex's employer, confirming he had not arrived for work and had not called to report an absence. They spoke with coworkers, none of whom reported unusual behavior in the days prior. They reviewed known appointments and commitments. Next came the collection of physical information. At the time, investigative tools were limited by the technology available. Phone records were requested, though access required formal processes and time. Vehicle information was entered into regional databases. Financial activity was reviewed for recent transactions. No immediate irregularities appeared. No large withdrawals, no recent purchases suggesting travel, no confirmed activity after the final known sighting. Officers documented everything and preserved the residence as it was found. As news of the disappearance spread, the response widened beyond law enforcement. Family members began contacting friends and acquaintances directly. Flyers were created. Local media outlets reported the disappearance, sharing Adam's photograph and last known details. Community members organized searches in nearby areas. Parks, parking structures, and commonly traveled routes were checked. Hospitals were contacted. Shelters were notified. Each effort followed procedure. Each step was logged. Days passed without results. As the initial phase continued, investigators revisited their working assumptions. There was still no physical indication of harm, no confirmed witness placing Alex in distress, no direct evidence pointing towards external involvement. This absence reinforced the early classification of the case. The investigation remained active but cautious. Every report, every lead, every call was reviewed, yet none provided clarity. By the end of the first week, the official story was defined less by what was found and more by what was not. As the investigation continued, attention turned towards the timeline itself. When laid out on paper, the sequence appeared straightforward, but closer examination revealed gaps, periods where Alex's movements could not be confirmed. The most significant gap began after his last verified activity. There were no witnesses who could place him at a specific location afterward, no receipts, no confirmed phone usage. Investigators acknowledged this gap, but early interpretations shaped how it was viewed. Rather than being treated as unknown territory, the absence was often explained through assumption. One such assumption was voluntary departure. This interpretation influenced the urgency applied to certain steps. Some evidence was not collected immediately. Some locations were searched later than they might have been. Statements, too, introduced complexity. While most accounts aligned, a small number differed in timing and detail. One witness recalled seeing Alex's vehicle at a location that did not match the established route. Another mentioned a brief interaction days earlier that investigators initially considered unrelated. These differences were documented, but not prioritized. At the time, they did not appear significant. Records show that certain interviews were conducted only once. Follow-ups were limited. Details that seemed minor were left unresolved. As weeks turned into months, these early decisions became fixed points in the case narrative. Assumptions began to harden into conclusions. The idea that Alex had chosen to leave gained traction, even without direct evidence. Alternative explanations received less attention. Some evidence was collected late. Phone records arrived after key windows had passed. Vehicle tracking options were limited by modern standards. What could not be recovered then cannot be recovered now. The timeline, once flexible, became static. Investigators worked within the framework already established, revisiting the same conclusions rather than questioning their foundation. Family members raised concerns. They questioned gaps in the timeline. They pointed out inconsistencies in witness accounts. They asked why certain leads were not pursued further. These concerns were noted, but they did not significantly alter the direction of the investigation.
Over time, the case accumulated unanswered questions. Why was there no confirmed activity after the last sighting? Why did no one report seeing Alex during a period when he should have been visible? Why did certain statements remain unresolved? Each question pointed back to the same issue. Early interpretations had shaped everything that followed. By the time doubts became clearer, opportunities had already passed. The investigation continued, but within boundaries defined at the very beginning.
As months passed without answers, the pace of the investigation began to change. There was no announcement, no clear moment when the case was declared inactive. Instead, activity slowed in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Follow-up interviews became less frequent. Search efforts became limited to reviewing existing information. New leads arrived less often. Eventually, there were none at all. The case file remained open in name, but daily attention shifted elsewhere. New cases demanded resources. New reports required immediate action. Time, always moving forward, did not pause for unresolved questions. Investigators who had worked the case from the beginning were reassigned. Some transferred to different units, others retired. With each transition, knowledge was passed along through reports and summaries, never quite the same as first-hand memory. Details that once felt clear became less precise. Which statement raised concern? Which lead felt incomplete? Which detail seemed important but could not be explained? These questions were harder to answer years later. Evidence was carefully stored. Boxes were labeled and logged. Photographs were archived. Documents were filed according to procedure. Nothing was discarded, but nothing changed. Technology advanced, but much of what had been missed could not be recreated. Moments passed without documentation could not be recovered. Witness recollections, once fresh, became uncertain. Meanwhile, life continued for everyone connected to the case. For the family, time carried a different weight. Each passing year marked another unanswered question, another birthday without clarity, another holiday without resolution. They continued to wait. They checked in with authorities. They asked whether anything new had emerged. They provided updated contact information, just in case. Occasionally, a call would come in, a reported sighting, a tip from someone who remembered something years later, a possibility that required review. Each one reopened hope briefly, and each one ended the same way. No confirmation, no connection, no explanation. As years turned into decades, memory itself became fragile. Witnesses moved away. Some could no longer be located. Others struggled to recall specifics they once described with confidence. Even physical locations changed. Businesses closed. Roads were altered. Landmarks referenced in early reports no longer existed in the same form. The context of the case slowly faded from the world around it. What remained was a record, a name, a date, a location, a series of unanswered questions preserved on paper. Time did not erase the case, but it reshaped it. It reduced urgency. It narrowed options. It left behind only what had been written down. And through all of it, one fact remained unchanged. No one knew what happened to Alex Duke. Silence settled where answers should have been, and that silence lasted far longer than anyone expected. As time passed and new information failed to emerge, attention gradually shifted from active searching to interpretation. When a case remains unresolved for years, theories begin to take shape, not as conclusions, but as attempts to explain what could not be proven. In this case, several interpretations developed over time. Each one followed a different path. Each one relied on different assumptions, and each one left important questions unanswered. Theory 1. The official conclusion. According to investigators, the earliest working conclusion was based on what could be confirmed. There were no verified signs of forced entry, no clear indication of an altercation at the last known location, no confirmed witness who saw Adams Lawrence leave against their will. Authorities focused on what they could document. They examined routine behavior. They reviewed known associations. They evaluated whether there was any evidence suggesting immediate danger. At the time, this interpretation appeared reasonable. There was no record of threats, no documented conflicts, no financial distress severe enough to draw attention. Investigators believed the absence of physical evidence limited the range of conclusions. However, even within this official framework, certain elements remained unresolved. There was no confirmed explanation for the break-in routine, no verified reason for the final missed contact, no physical trace indicating which direction Adams Lawrence may have taken next. The conclusion explained some aspects of the case, but not all of them. Theory 2. The family's belief. The family never accepted the official interpretation as complete. From their perspective, the absence of evidence did not equal clarity. They emphasized consistency. Alex Duke followed established routines. Plans were made in advance and rarely changed without explanation. Contact with family members was regular and dependable. The family questioned why someone with no known intention to leave would suddenly do so without notice. They raised concerns about timing. They pointed to moments where communication stopped abruptly. They noted details they felt were dismissed too early. According to family members, certain questions were never fully addressed. Why were specific witnesses not revisited? Why were some leads classified as unlikely without further review? Why did the investigation move away from certain possibilities so quickly? Their belief was not based on speculation, but on familiarity. They knew Alex Duke as a person, not a file, and to them, the official explanation did not align with that understanding. Theory 3. Independent researchers. Years later, independent researchers began reviewing the case. Journalists revisited archived reports. Retired detectives examined timelines without institutional constraints. Researchers compared the case to others from the same era. Some noted similarities in patterns, disappearances occurring during routine activities, lack of immediate physical evidence, delayed recognition of key time gaps. According to some researchers, the original investigation may have relied too heavily on early assumptions. They questioned whether alternative explanations were fully explored. They examined whether certain witness statements deserved renewed attention. They identified points where additional documentation could have altered direction. These researchers did not claim to solve the case. Instead, they highlighted inconsistencies. They emphasized that unanswered questions do not disappear with time, they accumulate. Theory 4. Modern forensic thinking. Advances in forensic science introduced new considerations. Techniques unavailable in 1990 are now standard practice. DNA analysis has improved significantly. Behavioral analysis now incorporates broader data sets. Digital reconstruction allows investigators to recreate timelines with greater precision. Some researchers believe that evidence collected decades ago may yield new information if re-examined. Others suggest that patterns of movement, communication gaps, or location data, once considered irrelevant, could now be meaningful. However, limitations remain. Not all evidence was preserved in a form suitable for modern testing. Not every question can be revisited with new tools. Time has restricted what technology can recover. Even so, modern forensic thinking has reopened discussions once considered closed. It has reminded investigators that conclusions are shaped by the tools available at the time.
and in this case, those tools were limited. After decades of review, no single theory explains everything. Each one answers some questions, each one leaves others unresolved, and taken together, they reveal a deeper truth. This case was never simple. It was shaped by assumptions, constraints, and the passage of time. And despite years of analysis, the central question remains unchanged. What happened to Alex Duke?
For decades, this case was defined by what could not be found. No confirmed location, no verified sequence beyond the final known moments, no evidence strong enough to force a single conclusion. But sometimes, the most important information is not hidden. Sometimes it is recorded, filed, and quietly set aside. In this case, that detail existed from the beginning. It was present in the paperwork, logged during the early phase of the investigation, reviewed briefly and then dismissed. At the time, it did not appear important. Only years later did its significance become clear. The detail appeared in a routine record, an entry created during the first days after Alex Duke was reported missing. It was not dramatic. It did not contradict the initial assumptions directly. It did not point clearly in any single direction. Because of that, it was categorized as low priority. According to investigators, the record did not align with the working timeline they were building, so it was noted and then moved past. That record involved a brief interaction, a person who believed they had seen Alex Duke after the last officially confirmed sighting. The timing was uncertain. The memory was not precise to the minute. The individual was not considered central to the case. Investigators documented the statement, but it did not fit the sequence they had already established. As a result, the witness was not revisited. No follow-up interview, no additional clarification, no attempt to reconcile the account with other data. At the time, this decision seemed reasonable. The investigation was moving quickly. Resources were limited. Attention was focused elsewhere. Years later, when independent reviewers examined the file, that record stood out, not because it proved anything on its own, but because of what it suggested. If the account was accurate, even partially, it introduced a possibility that had never been fully explored. It suggested that Adams Lawrence may have been present somewhere later than originally believed. That single shift mattered, because it affected everything that came after. If the timeline extended beyond the accepted endpoint, then several assumptions had to be reconsidered. Where Alex Duke was last believed to be, who may have seen them afterward, which locations were relevant and which were not. Suddenly, actions once considered impossible became possible. Movements once ruled out could no longer be dismissed so easily. The case did not change overnight, but its foundation began to feel less certain. There was another element tied to that same overlooked moment, a test that could not be performed in 1990. At the time, investigators collected limited physical material connected to the report. Nothing that appeared conclusive, nothing that justified deeper analysis with the tools available then. Today, those tools are different. According to forensic specialists, even minimal material can sometimes provide insight when examined with modern methods. But because the record was deprioritized, that material was never preserved with future testing in mind. It was handled according to standards of the time, and time has a way of narrowing what remains usable. Experts reviewing the case now agree on one point. The detail was not ignored out of negligence. It was overlooked because it did not fit the story investigators believed they were documenting. At the time, the focus was on clarity, on narrowing possibilities quickly, on building a timeline that felt stable. That approach shaped every decision that followed. Today, professionals see that moment differently. They see it as a pause that should have lasted longer, a statement that deserved another conversation, a record that raised questions instead of resolving them. They also recognize the limits of hindsight. Investigations are built in real time with imperfect information. Still, the implications remain. One overlooked detail may have redirected the entire case. The importance of this moment is not that it provides an answer. It does not. Its importance lies in what it disrupts. It challenges the accepted timeline. It weakens assumptions that were treated as settled. It forces a reevaluation of what was considered possible. And once that process begins, the case can no longer be viewed the same way. This detail did not solve the disappearance of Alex Duke, but it changed how investigators understand it. It reminded everyone involved that unresolved cases are not static. They evolve, sometimes quietly, sometimes decades later, and sometimes all it takes is one overlooked record to ask a question that should have been asked from the start. Today, the case of Alex Duke exists in a quiet, careful place. It is no longer active in the way it once was. There are no daily briefings, no ongoing searches, no new public timelines announced, but it has not been closed. According to official records, the case remains classified as unresolved. That distinction matters because it means investigators have not reached a conclusion supported by evidence strong enough to be final. In the years following the renewed attention to the overlooked record, authorities reviewed portions of the file again. Not all at once, not with a full-scale task force, but in segments. Statements were reread. Dates were checked against each other. Procedures from the original investigation were compared to modern standards. In public statements, officials have acknowledged that early assumptions influenced how the case progressed. They have also stated that no definitive proof has emerged to overturn the original working theory entirely. Both things can be true at the same time. As of today, there has been no official announcement confirming a specific outcome, no formal resolution, no public identification of a responsible party, no confirmed explanation for what happened after the last verified moment. Authorities have been careful in their language. They describe the case as open, but limited by time. They emphasize that all known physical evidence has been examined using the best available methods. They also acknowledge that some opportunities no longer exist. Witness memories have faded. Some individuals involved are no longer available to questioning. Certain records cannot be recreated. What is confirmed remains clear. Alex Duke was last verified at a specific place and time. There is no reliable evidence placing them elsewhere after that moment. No financial activity followed. No confirmed communication occurred. Those facts have not changed. What has changed is how investigators understand what those facts do not explain. What remains uncertain is just as important. The exact sequence after the final confirmed sighting is unknown. The meaning of the overlooked record has never been fully resolved. The possibility of additional witnesses remains open but unverified. There is no single explanation that accounts for every detail without leaving gaps, and because of that, the case continues to resist closure. Family members have stated through the years that their hope has shifted, not toward a specific outcome, but toward clarity.
They have expressed a desire for answers grounded in evidence, whatever those answers may be. They continue to live with the absence of certainty, an absence that does not diminish with time. Professionals who have reviewed the case in recent years describe it as instructive, not because of what it proves, but because of what it shows. How early interpretations shape long-term outcomes, how decisions made under pressure echo forward, how unresolved cases do not end, they simply become quieter. As it stands today, the disappearance of Alex Duke remains exactly where it has been for decades, documented reviewed, unresolved. The file is still there, waiting. And until something changes, until a new piece of information surfaces, the case remains suspended between what is known and what cannot yet be explained. That is where it stands, not solved, not forgotten, still unanswered. After decades of review, analysis, and careful reconsideration, the case of Alex Duke remains defined by what is missing. Not just evidence, not just answers, but the space between what is known and what has never been said. Cases like this do not disappear with time. They settle into records, memories, and quiet conversations. They remain present in small ways, through dates remembered, details half recalled, moments that never fully fade. Somewhere, a memory still exists. It may be incomplete, it may feel ordinary, it may seem unrelated, but history has shown that truth does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits in silence, unchanged, for years. The question is not whether someone remembers something. The question is why it has never been shared. Was it dismissed as unimportant? Was it assumed someone else already knew? Or did time simply place distance between the moment and the meaning? That question remains open, and until it is answered, the story of Alex Duke remains unfinished. If you value careful, respectful examinations of unresolved cases, stories told with patience, clarity, and attention to detail, you are welcome to stay with this channel. Future investigations will continue to focus on documented facts, overlooked details, and the long shadows cast by unanswered questions. If you choose to subscribe, you will be notified when the next case is released. Thank you for spending this time here. Thank you for listening closely. And thank you for remembering those whose stories are still waiting to be completed.